Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, A Conversation with Death. A man who rules the world and the angel of darkness take on a horde of demons in this inaugural John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, A Conversation with Death for 99 cents on Kindle or in paperback today. I recently read an article that stated that after Nike announced that Colin Kappernick would be the new face for its 30th anniversary Just Do It campaign, that their sales went up 31%. And with that rise in sales at Nike, I clearly see how many of these Afro American Negroes fell for the same okie doke one mo again. And what was that okie doke that these Afro American Negroes fell for? Well, they fell for first the race hustle of a biracial race hustler like Colin Kaepernick, and second, what the Afro American Negro fell for was being misled by a biracial Negro. Now, the history of the Afro American Negro and these mixed race people is this. Many of these Afro American Negroes, whenever they see a mixed race or a biracial person, they get spellbound. And they get spellbound because they believe that this person is better because they have that creamy white skin that is closer to white, and either those crystal blue eyes, those hazel amber eyes, or those emerald green eyes. And because they have these white features, they believe that this person, because they are closer to white, is someone they can trust. And this has been going on ever since even the days of Jim Crow, where you had people like Adam Clayton Powell, who was a major leader in the civil rights movement, and many of those leaders of the NAACPs locally who were biracial. And many times, white people would use these biracials to control and manipulate the Negro masses. And this is what's being done by your Nike right now. Your Nike decided they would go out here and hire this Colin Kaepernick, this failed San Francisco 49ers quarterback, to be the face of their Just Do It campaign. And by going out here and hiring this Colin Kaepernick to be the face of their Just Do It campaign, they could appear to be a woke, self-aware corporation that was actually interested and concerned about the issues of the black community. And most of these Afro-American Negroes, they're sitting there believing that Nike actually cares about the black community because they've gone out here and hired this Colin Kaepernick, this biracial, light-skinned black male who couldn't cut it as a quarterback on the San Francisco 49ers. And because they got caught up in the racial rhetoric of Colin Kaepernick, they believe that Nike is a woke corporation that is out to look out for their best interests. And that's why they believe that they need to go out here and go buy all of these Nike sneakers and make their sales increase, not knowing they're being manipulated by the Nike Corporation. Because this is the same Nike Corporation 30 years ago that said that they weren't responsible for the deaths of black men who were being murdered at the time over these Air Jordan tennis shoes that at the time in 1988 started costing $100. And as black men were being murdered in the streets over these Air Jordan tennis shoes, your Nike CEO, Phil Knight, said he's not responsible for their deaths. And your Michael Jordan, who was a part of the Just Do It campaign 30 years ago, said the same thing. He's not responsible for all of the deaths of these black men over these $100 tennis shoes that were made in China for $4 a pair. But many of your Negroes, they can't connect the dots and see how they're being bamboozled. They're sitting there thinking Nike is a great corporation that is so self-aware and so concerned about black people because they're standing with Colin Kaepernick, who they say believe in something, even if it costs you everything. But they're not concerned with what the Nike Corporation has cost many black people over the last 30 years, costing many black people their lives as they have been murdered over these sneakers, which Nike inflated the price of intentionally 30 years ago because they knew that they could turn this into a piece of social currency among the Negroes. Because originally, before the 1988 and Air Jordan 3, your Air Jordan sneakers only cost $60 to $70. Air Jordan 1 was only $59.99, and that was back in the mid 1980s. I remember when Air Jordan 1 came out, and it was only $59.99, and Air Jordan 2 was only from $59 to $69.99. But in 1988, when Air Jordan 3 came out, Air Jordan 3's price was $100. And once Air Jordan 3 made it to the $100 mark, we had all these Negroes running to go buy Air Jordan 3 because the price was set at a level where it was so expensive that these sneakers became social currency and high status items. And again, your Phil Knight seeing black men being murdered over these sneakers made in a Chinese factory for $4 said he wasn't responsible. But the same Nike Corporation wants us to believe in something, even if it costs us everything. And what they want us to believe in is this con where they can manipulate the black masses into believing that they care so much about black people because they hired your Colin Kaepernick. And again, this is how they manipulate black people because as long as they follow the lead of this biracial Negro, they can control the black masses and get a steady stream of black dollars into their coffers. So they're using this Colin Kaepernick as a way to get the black dollar. And what's sad is this is the same OKIE DOKE that has been run on the Negro at least 3 times in the past. The first person to run this OKIE DOKE was Halle Berry when she won her Oscar for Monsters Ball, where she's talked about how there weren't opportunities for black women, and then got this Oscar that was supposed to open doors, but didn't open doors for anyone because your Halle Berry, once she arrived, walked away. The second person to run this same OKIE DOKE on these Negroes with their light skin was your Barack Obama. Now, your Barack Obama was a grassroots guy who was working in Illinois, and he used his biracial skin tone as a way to lead blacks into voting for him as the senator, and then later on to become the president of the United States. And then once your Barack Obama arrived as president of the United States, all those black people who supported him, he had no interest in looking out for. What he did was he got his votes and elevated himself, and then abandoned the black community. Now, the third person to run this OKIE DOKE was your messy Jesse Williams. Now, your messy Jesse Williams, like Halle Berry and Barack Obama, were hand-picked Negroes that white supremacy used to be able to control the black masses. And that's the thing that many of these Negroes just can't figure out. They think that these biracial black people, again, are black and are for black people, but usually they have been hand-picked to be the representative over the black community. And your Jesse Williams, with his grassroots community efforts as a teacher and a so-called self-aware black man, he was being poised to be a face to speak for the black community. So they gave him this BET award, and then they had him go on stage, and he made this speech that made it look like he was so self-aware for the black community. However, what happened was your Jesse Williams wound up jumping the gun because he thought he was going to be on his way to becoming the next Denzel Washington. And because he thought he was on his way, he decided to divorce his black wife too soon and then get involved with Minka Kelly. So he tripped up himself, but they were clearly engineering him to be another one of these faces that would be able they could use as a buffer Negro and a leader to tell the black community how to think, to tell the black community how to behave, and to tell the black community how to go about its business. And this is what's being done with your Colin Kaepernick right now. Your Colin Kaepernick is putting on this pro-black facade that makes it look like he's such a real brother. However, I can see through that facade because all you have to do is ask a couple of critical questions about your so-called self-aware pro-black Colin Kaepernick. And the first question I ask is, when do pro-black revolutionaries get corporate sponsors? Because all of the pro-blacks, like the Black Panthers back in the day, they had no corporate sponsors. I asked the same question about your messy Jesse Williams a couple of years ago because, again, here is a guy who was getting on the stage of BET, which is owned by Viacom, and he's going to get on the stage and make this speech. And many of the Negroes then couldn't connect the dots, just like they can't connect the dots right now regarding Colin Kaepernick. Again, when does a pro-black get a sponsorship from a corporation when he is protesting the establishment? And how does someone who is anti-establishment manage to be a part of an advertising campaign for a company that is a part of the so-called establishment? When you start asking critical questions like this, you can see what Colin Kaepernick is all about, and you can see who Colin Kaepernick truly is. Because, again, if you're supposed to be some sort of revolutionary who believes in something, and even if it sacrifices him everything, then again, how does he wind up with corporate sponsorship? Corporations are a part of the establishment, and if you're supposed to be anti-establishment and you're supposed to believe in something to the point where you're willing to sacrifice everything, then you're not going to want any sort of corporate dollars because you want to stand for your principles. So that shows me again that your Colin Kaepernick is nothing more than a race hustler, and it's about him getting paid at the expense of the Afro-American Negro. And because the Negro is so completely clueless, he's running out here to buy these Nike sneakers because he believes Nike is self-aware, not understanding that your Colin Kaepernick is just being a buffer Negro. And as the previous buffer Negroes, like your Adam Clayton Powell, what they're doing is using him to lead the black community into participating in the behaviors they want, because they know that the Afro-American Negro will always follow the lead of a biracial, because they believe a biracial is closer to white, and because this person is closer to white, this is a person that the Negro can trust. Because when it comes down to the Negro only judges people based on the color of their skin, but never the content of their character. And when I look at Colin Kaepernick's character, I see an extremely disingenuous and dishonest man who plays the race card in the hopes of making money at the expense of black people. Because that's what he was doing when he was making that stand, so-called stand, where he took those knees in the so-called protest against police brutality. Because again, I ask another critical question. How many black-owned businesses does your so-called conscious, self-aware Colin Kaepernick support? Where does Colin Kaepernick participate in group economics? I mean, if he's so self-aware and so concerned about the black community, then why wasn't he taking his dollars to build and invest in the black community? And I don't mean donating to some crap non-profit, because anybody can donate to a non-profit, because non-profits that's just a tax write-off for these rich Negroes. No, we're talking about investing in black-owned businesses, investing in black-owned corporations, and trying to build infrastructure in the black community. Now, that type of behavior, that would be revolutionary behavior, because that's what the old school Black Panthers were all about. And what we talk about old school revolutionary, it's going against the establishment towards building your own resources and building your own community. But your Colin Kaepernick was never about building his own community. He was all about taking these knees in a protest that was supposed to be against police brutality, that was supposed to stoke up the emotions of many of these Negroes to believe that he was on their side, when in actuality it was just a ploy to get people on his side so that they could shame the NFL into giving him free agency or a trade where he could get this money from the NFL, all for his mediocre play. Now, if your Colin Kaepernick was a top player, he would be like Odell Beckham Jr., a guy who just recently got the biggest contract in the NFL. And the reason why your Odell Beckham Jr. got the biggest contract in the NFL is due to his statistics. When you look at Odell Beckham's stats, Odell Beckham can deliver in a game. And that's why the New York Giants paid Odell Beckham all this money. Now, the San Francisco 49ers, they weren't going to pay Colin Kaepernick for mediocre play, because they look at his stats and they clearly did not see a quarterback that was on the Joe Montana level or the Steve Young level, where they could get to the point where he could lead a team to a Super Bowl and a championship. And because your Colin Kaepernick is a mediocre player, he decided he would play this race card. And sadly, many of these black folks out here, they haven't connected the dots to see how they are being played by your Colin Kaepernick and how they've just been played by the Nike Corporation. Because the Nike Corporation, at the end of the day, they're going to promote this conscious message about Colin Kaepernick, and they're going to use that as a way to get money out of these black people so they can continue supporting a corporation whose original message from the 1980s and the early 1990s is they're not responsible for the deaths of black people who wear their Air Jordan tennis shoes, but we're supposed to believe they're so self-aware right now. I mean, recently, 2 years ago almost, we had another black boy who was murdered for these sneakers, but we're supposed to believe that this corporation is so conscious, even though black men have been murdered over these sneakers, and we're supposed to believe that they're so conscious, even though the people who make their sneakers make less than a couple of dollars an hour for sneakers that only cost $4. If the Nike Corporation believed in its so-called social justice rhetoric, your Nike Corporation would be out here lowering the cost of all those sneakers these Negroes are buying in their quest to support Colin Kaepernick. But the Nike Corporation isn't interested in lowering their prices in the cause for social justice, because they're all about profiting at the expense of gullible Negroes who continue to fall for the same okie dokes, because all they believe in is the fact that this man's color of his skin is light, and that because the color of his skin is right, everything out of his mouth is right. And because everything coming out of his mouth is right, they believe it's true, even though they don't understand how Nike just takes advantage of you. This whole Just Do It campaign is more of the same, and sadly, many of these Negroes out here just don't have the critical thinking skills to connect the dots and see how the same okie doke has been run on them time and time again, and how your Colin Kaepernick is just a race hustler, and the Nike Corporation is using him to hustle dollars out of their pocket, and they're trying to use this light-skinned pitchman to control the black masses. and get them to behave in the way they want to behave, because at the end of the day, the next corporation just sees the Negro as a slave. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the Easting series, the Temptation of John Haynes, the John Haynes series, and the Smith-Dorella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.